At 64, the tragedy of Garth Brooks is beyond heartbreaking. He was supposed to be the one artist fame couldn't touch. For decades, Garth Brooks wasn't just country music's biggest star. He was the man who rewrote what a country star could even be. He filled stadiums that had never hosted a country act before. He shattered sales records that had stood for years. He became one of the best-selling solo artists in the history of recorded music. His concerts didn't feel like country shows. They felt like rock spectacles, full of movement and noise and spectacle, and that combination turned him into something bigger than a genre. He became a cultural phenomenon that reached far past Nashville. But success at that scale always comes with a bill attached. Behind the sold-out arenas and the historic numbers was a man constantly negotiating with himself, trying to figure out how to be a superstar and a husband and a father all at the same time, without one of those roles quietly devouring the others. Now, at 64, the story of Garth Brooks isn't a simple highlight reel. It's a story about ambition, sacrifice, reinvention, heartbreak, and a legal controversy that has complicated one of country music's most celebrated legacies. Let's start with a moment that still gets talked about in Ireland more than a decade later because it captures so much of who Brooks is: his stubbornness, his sentimentality, and his refusal to compromise even when compromise was the easier road. In the summer of 2014, Brooks announced 5 shows at Dublin's Croke Park Stadium, meant to be the triumphant centerpiece of his return to touring. More than 400,000 tickets sold almost immediately, an almost unthinkable number for a country the size of Ireland. But the excitement collided head-on with the realities of running a stadium in a residential neighborhood. Local residents objected. Dublin City Council reviewed the request and ultimately approved licenses for 3 of the 5 nights, citing concerns about noise, disruption, and a cap on how many large events the stadium could host in a single year. Brooks was offered a path forward: play the 3 nights that had been approved. Thousands of fans would still get their show. But he refused. To him, choosing which fans got the real experience and which got nothing felt like being asked to pick a favorite child. So when the council held firm and legal challenges made even the 3 permitted shows uncertain, Brooks made the call himself: all 5 or none. In the end, it was none. Every single ticket was refunded, the largest refund operation Ticketmaster had ever handled in Ireland. Years later, reflecting on it, Brooks said that losing those shows felt like a death in the family. That's not a line written for him. It's how he actually described it, and it's part of why the moment still resonates. It wasn't just a scheduling headache or a business dispute. It was the emotional collapse of something he'd poured himself into, undone by forces no amount of stardom could override. What makes the story worth revisiting, though, is that it didn't end in permanent heartbreak. Irish fans didn't disappear. They started showing up at his concerts everywhere else in the world, waving Irish flags from the crowd, as if to say the bond hadn't broken. And in 2022, Brooks finally returned to Croke Park and played all 5 shows sold out without incident. He has since called that redemption arc one of the most meaningful chapters of his entire career, proof that even his most painful public failure eventually resolved into something whole. Not every collapse gets that kind of resolution. Some collapses stay open wounds. In 2024, Brooks found himself facing a different kind of storm entirely when a woman who had worked as his hairstylist and makeup artist filed a lawsuit accusing him of sexual assault, alleging an incident during a 2019 work trip. Brooks has denied every allegation. He has described himself as the target of an extortion attempt, claiming the accusations surfaced only after he declined to grant the woman a salaried position with benefits. Both sides have since traded serious accusations in court filings, allegations of assault on one side, allegations of a financially motivated shakedown on the other, and as of the most recent court activity, the legal fight is still unresolved, moving between federal courts in Mississippi and California. That kind of unresolved public conflict changes the shape of a legacy conversation in a way a simple scandal doesn't. When an artist has spent decades cultivating an image built on sincerity, family devotion, and emotional openness, an unresolved legal battle forces the public to sit with uncertainty rather than a clean verdict. It doesn't erase the music. It doesn't erase the achievements. But it does complicate the way people talk about him, at a point in life when most people want their story to be settling into something clear, not opening into something contested. Fame doesn't freeze reality in place. It just makes whatever is happening impossible to ignore. To understand how someone ends up carrying that much complexity, you have to go back to where it all started, a kid from Oklahoma who had no idea any of this was coming. Garth Brooks was born in Tulsa and raised in Yukon, Oklahoma, in a household where music wasn't a hobby, It was inheritance. His father had a background that blended discipline with musical talent, and his mother had experience as a singer herself. Growing up surrounded by music didn't guarantee stardom, though. That part had to be earned the old-fashioned way. He attended Oklahoma State University, played local clubs, and kept showing up, night after night, in rooms that weren't glamorous and audiences that weren't guaranteed. That early grind shaped him. It gave him patience, and it gave him hunger, and hungry artists tend to take risks that comfortable ones never will. When Brooks moved to Nashville in mid-1980s, he wasn't arriving as anybody's guaranteed success story. Nashville was, and still is, a city that sorts talent ruthlessly. Either you had something the industry hadn't seen before, or you got swallowed by the sheer volume of people trying the exact same thing. Brooks spent real time in that middle zone, playing smaller venues, building a reputation the slow way, long before anyone was calling him a finished product. What eventually set him apart wasn't just his voice. It was the way he performed. He didn't stand behind a microphone waiting for the band to catch up to him. He moved across the stage like he was trying to physically pull the audience into the song with him. At a time when country music still leaned toward a controlled, buttoned-up presentation, Brooks brought scale and spectacle that felt borrowed from rock and roll. Some traditionalists saw that as a problem: too commercial, too theatrical, too loud. But that exact criticism became part of the proof that he was onto something real, because the things people complained about were the same things that helped drag country music into the mainstream in a way it had never occupied before. By the time his popularity fully took hold, Brooks wasn't just a hit-making machine. He was redefining what scale even meant for a country artist. He crossed into audiences who had never considered themselves country fans. He turned tours into cultural events rather than tour stops. And that kind of visibility comes with an unavoidable cost. The bigger the career gets, the more the public wants to own a piece of the person behind it, their time, their image, their consistency, the version of them fans fell in love with, frozen exactly as they remember it. That's an impossible standard for anyone to live up to, let alone someone whose entire life had become public property. One of the quieter, more human parts of his story is his marriage to Sandy Mao, which began before the fame became overwhelming. She was there in the years when Brooks was still building something, before the touring machine consumed his schedule entirely. But a marriage can only absorb so much distance before that distance starts speaking its own language. Brooks was constantly on the road. Mal was holding down the center of family life. Neither of them was doing anything wrong. It was simply the strain of trying to run a household around a life built for public performance. Their divorce, finalized in 2001, wasn't just a private ending. It became the moment that forced Brooks to reckon with what his career had actually cost his home life. He's spoken openly since about that toll, and that honesty is part of what makes the story land. He wasn't just saying the schedule was demanding. He was admitting that the version of success he'd built came with a real human price. And there were 3 daughters watching all of it happen. For Brooks, fatherhood stopped being an abstract identity and became the reason for a total reset. He didn't want his daughters to know him primarily through television appearances and headlines. He wanted to be present for the ordinary stuff, school events, birthdays, the small, unremarkable moments that quietly shape a childhood. That's the part of his story that feels the most relatable, because the trade-off is so plain. You can chase greatness, or you can be present, and doing both at once is rarely simple. By 2001, Brooks had reached the point where he could see his daughters growing up largely without him in the way he wanted, and that realization can hit harder than any professional setback. It's one thing to miss an opportunity. It's another to watch your children becoming people while you're mostly somewhere else. That was the real center of his decision to step away from music that year. Not boredom, not retirement in any conventional sense, but a choice to be a father before he was a brand. That decision didn't come out of nowhere, either. Right before it, Brooks had already taken one of the strangest risks of his career. The Chris Gaines Project, an alter ego persona built around a different look, a different sound, and reportedly a planned film. The public reaction ranged from curious to openly confused, and the whole experiment became one of those celebrity moments people still bring up because it refused to behave the way anyone expected. Brooks later acknowledged that the project was widely misunderstood, and in hindsight, it revealed something important, that even a performer at the height of his popularity can misjudge how far an audience is willing to follow him into something experimental. Not every bold swing lands. Sometimes the risk simply reveals a limit. So when Brooks stepped away from the spotlight in 2001, it wasn't a random act of exhaustion. It was the accumulation of everything happening around him at once: a marriage that had ended, daughters who needed him, and a growing awareness that if he kept moving at the same pace, he might win the world and lose the life he actually wanted. That's why the retirement mattered as much as it did. It wasn't a pause. It was a genuine surrender of momentum in exchange for something more personal. But stepping away from the biggest stage in the world doesn't come without its own cost. The silence gets loud. The industry keeps moving. Younger artists rise into the space you used to occupy. And at some point, even the biggest names have to wonder whether they'll ever belong to that world again. For Brooks, the road back to that world started with something steadier than a comeback tour, his relationship with Trisha Yearwood. The two had known each other since the late 1980s, crossing paths in Nashville long before either of them had reached stardom. Their friendship survived both of their first marriages, and once those marriages ended, it turned into something more. In 2005, Brooks proposed to Yearwood on stage in front of thousands of fans, and that December, the two married in a small private ceremony at their home in Oklahoma. Yearwood has spoken publicly about stepping back from touring roughly 200 days a year so she could actually be present, cooking dinner, attending soccer games, helping raise Brooks' 3 daughters rather than watching that life unfold from a distance. Brooks has credited her directly as the reason he was willing to trust the stage again. And when he did return, it wasn't a nostalgia act. It was a full-force comeback, sold-out shows, massive audiences, and a reminder to the industry that his name still carried weight, maybe more than before, simply because of how long he'd been away. Most artists who step back for years come back smaller or trapped in the shadow of their old success. Brooks came back with a presence that reminded everyone why he'd been so hard to replace in the first place. So after everything, the rise, the reinvention, the retirement, the comeback, the unresolved legal battle, what's actually left behind? Before you can weigh the tragedy, you have to weigh the scale of what he actually built. Brooks has sold more than 170 million records, placing him among the best-selling solo artists in American music history. He helped turn country concerts into full-scale stadium productions, and an entire generation of country performers who came after him grew up watching what he did on a live stage and tried to build their own careers with that same sense of ambition. His influence reached past his own genre, proving that country music could compete with pop and rock without abandoning what made it country in the first place. That's the part of his story that can't be reduced to a single lawsuit, a single canceled tour, or a single strange side project. His career changed the business. It changed audience expectations. And that's exactly why the weight of his personal struggles lands so heavily. The bigger the legacy, the louder the losses echo against it. So why does the story still feel so heavy, even with all of that success attached to it? Because the real difficulty in Garth Brooks' life was never a single bad decision. It was the ongoing, nearly impossible attempt to be everything at once. Superstar, father, husband, artist, risk-taker, public figure. And every version of that life seemed to demand a sacrifice from one of the others. Imagine the alternate versions. In one, he never steps away, and the career keeps climbing, but the cost at home keeps compounding. In another, he never comes back, and the music side of his identity stays permanently unfinished. In the version we actually got, he tried to live somewhere in the middle, stepping away, coming back, taking risks that didn't always work, absorbing public setbacks, and still finding his way to genuine resolution in places like Ireland. That's the real heartbreak underneath this story. Not that Garth Brooks was weak, but that he was human, trying to hold together a life too big for any single person to fully control. Fame has a strange way of freezing people in the public imagination. Fans still picture the smiling, endlessly energetic superstar from the 90s, even as the real man kept aging, kept changing, and kept absorbing the consequences of a life lived mostly in public. At 64, Garth Brooks is proof that fame doesn't stop the passage of time. It just makes that passage more visible to everyone watching. So there it is. Not a simple headline and not a single tragic moment, but a long and complicated life built on ambition, sacrifice, reinvention, and the ongoing pressure of trying to live between two worlds at once, the stage and everything waiting for him off of it.